Well, good afternoon to you all. It's delight to be here in London. As you can tell from my accent, I'm from Detroit. I've actually been in Detroit for 15 years, and I haven't been able to speak like a Detroiter. I still get people asking me, when I'm going home, and when I'm going. And I say, well, look, I've probably been here longer than you. I'll bet you your restaurant tip that I have. But anyway, what I want to talk to you today about is some of the lessons that we learned in Detroit when we had the mother of all crises back between 2007 and 2011. And I want to start off by making it clear that, as opposed to the two previous speakers, who were brilliant, by the way, I'm not an expert in anything other than perhaps learning from failure. And just in passing, I've been invited to speak at the University of Windsor next Wednesday, University of Western Ontario next Wednesday on some of my failures, so I should have no problem filling out the lecture. So, the tragedy of Detroit. This was the front page on the Time magazine in, I think it was about 2008. Time actually moved to Detroit. They bought a house and they had a team there full time looking at how one of the great cities of America had been brought so low. And they followed what we were doing. And this was some of the bad publicity we had. We was inundated with journalists from all over the world, China, Japan, whatever. They'd come in and they'd say, excuse me, can you show me a derelict factory? And we'd have to take them to a derelict factory, but then there would be an opportunity to engage them in conversation. And as I will say as we go along, we worked with the press and we got some phenomenal publicity, including we were in The Economist, one of the world's great Bibles of economic development, on no fewer than 2 occasions. I wanted to give you just a little bit of background so you understand who's talking to you. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I became one not to get rich, but because no one else would employ me. And over the years, I've been involved in a number of companies. Some have worked, some haven't. This one didn't work. It was a blues cafe in Sarasota, Florida, where I lost everything, including my house. But I don't want you to feel sorry for me. This was another one. I got the idea that America was ready for lean beef. Of course, they weren't, because they need 25% fat in their burgers for them to stick together. I thought there was a market for women's soccer. Wrote a book, established a website, but that was back in 1999 when there was everybody, including myself, was a little ahead of the game and I couldn't get advertising. And so then my next gig was in Detroit. And the reason it was in Detroit was I was coming off a string of failures. And I'd been able to raise $500,000 for a life sciences company called Astrand. And the competition had $132 million. So I knew that was only one thing I could do if this was going to have a chance. And that was find the lowest cost place in America and get help from the entire community. Now, in 6 years, this company went from an idea to an IPO, put on one new job a month, and is still in Detroit doing well. I mention it because what I did was to get the community behind me. So I retired in 2007 with no economic development experience whatsoever. And the president of Wayne State University said, I want you to take over this. This was actually where the Corvette was designed many, many years ago. It's a building that had been empty for 50 years. And it was going to be the new tech town, 200,000 square feet of space. So what I did was to think about what it was that had helped me to be successful. Because I don't want you under any illusions. I'm not the great titan of industry, big solver of all problems. I had ruthlessly used every resource that was available in the community. And I set about building what I call an entrepreneurial church. And we raised money, and we built out labs, office space, networking space, shared meeting rooms, and a low-cost business center. But the most important picture I want you to look at there speaks to what both of the previous speakers spoke to, and that is the sense of community. How do you build a community? It's actually not that difficult when you think about it, and things like churches for several centuries have figured out how to do it. You have a service or a meeting every Sunday at 11 o'clock. Everybody's welcome. All you've got to do is turn up and look halfway tidy. Well, that's what we did. We started a thing called First Friday. On the first Friday of every month, we opened our doors. We had, pizzas or some soft drinks or whatever, and we had a speaker. Now, you weren't required to go and listen to the speaker. The speaker was always off in another room. You could just come in and network. We started, I think the first one we had about 20 people turn up, and some of them were relatives and the others were friends I dragged in. We ended up with several hundred, and we had to continually find bigger meeting rooms. And here's the point, and it was made by the first speaker, I think, about Starbucks not being the place where you can communicate, where you can network, where you can engage in the entrepreneurial community and find people who are trying to start their own businesses, who are trying to look for partners or look for finance or look for lawyers or whatever. But those First Fridays were crucial in developing an entrepreneurial spirit in Detroit. And let me tell you, for the absence of doubt, there was no entrepreneurial spirit there. And there wasn't for a good reason, because there was a generation, the Fords and the General Motors and so on, they'd got entrepreneurial spirit to burn. All you had to do was get a job, and then you got a boat, and then you got, a cottage in the UP, and you got a retirement program. Setting up your own business was not on Detroiters' agenda, and we had to get it on their agenda. So, we were making quite good progress when 2008 hit, and there was the collapse of the auto industry. Now, let me put this in context for you. The experts tell me that 50% of the Detroit population at that time was illiterate. They also quote an unemployment figure of 25%. And a another figure of people who hadn't got a job but weren't registered as unemployed of 25%. So half the population was unemployed. So what we did is we went to foundations, Kresge, Kellogg, and others, and said, look, you've got to help. You've got to give us some money for training. And on May 2008, they agreed, May the 18th. Within 30 days, we had our first meeting of people who were out of work. And this was in addition to the First Fridays, which were then overwhelmed. And we brought in keynote speakers like Chris Gardner. Anybody who's seen The Pursuit of Happiness? Yes, gentleman over there. He's a great guy of talking about starting where you are, not where you think you should be, but where you actually are. And one of the things we did was over 2.5 to 3 years, we had meetings to introduce people to entrepreneurship. And that's, the total number of people was about 8,000. Of those, something like 4,000 signed up for training programs. That's a lot of people. And of those, in excess of 1,000 actually set up their own business by 2011. Big numbers. Here's in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see my head, which is slightly more interesting than of my face, talking to a group, one of these groups of people. And it was not at, that was at the Next Energy building because we didn't have enough space to accommodate everyone at Tech Town. And what we did was to develop, and this is something you may want to think about in London, what we called a funnel. Because entrepreneurship is not for everybody. Some people are better off as mentors. Some people are better off as interns. Some people may want to, work as consultants. So we tried to funnel people and figure out who really was interested in entrepreneurial training. And then, remember this entrepreneurial church I talked about? We invited every competitor that we could think of into Tech Town, our building, which by this time was built out. So, you had US government, Small Business Association, Michigan State, MEDC, Shifting Gears program, Michigan Small Business Technology Development Center, Detroit Microloan, Kaufman Foundation running courses. There were 3 or 4 others. And more than that, we also went to the government of Mexico and invited them to come and establish an office of Mexican small businesses that were looking to establish a North American presence, and they came in. And we also worked with University of Windsor Business School so that we had a series of first-class interns working on our small businesses with projects with business school. So there was Odette School of Business as well as Wayne State School of Business, the University of Michigan School of Business. We got everybody in there. Otherwise, we couldn't have done it. And, I throw that out for a thought for you. You have to break down the silos. And you've got to get everybody into that entrepreneurial church or churches. You may have 2, 3, 4, 5 of these places. But the key is to create the community by having regular meetings that everybody knows they can turn up. During 2008 and 2009, I'd go to these First Friday meetings. And I always knew I would have an emotional conversation. And it was very often with someone who'd had a very successful career, perhaps in General Motors or Ford or whatever. And it was very much people who were in their 40s or 50s. And they'd often break down and cry. And it was actually not a difficult conversation to have, because I was able to say, because it was true, that I've been there. I've been where you are now. I've been broke. I've lost my confidence, and I don't know where the next step is going to lead, and I don't know quite how to take it. And I would commend to you the thought that confidence and building confidence, particularly in older adults, is one of the keys to rebuilding any community. Now, because we had a lot of money from various foundations, we had to keep detailed records. And the records we kept were independently verified by the Kaufman Foundation. And when I first started getting the figures, I was really shocked. First 1,000 people we had through, 30% were over 46. 10% were over 56. There were 5% under 25. So the image of the entrepreneur in America or Detroit today being that kid with torn jeans in a dorm in Harvard, eating ramen noodles and inventing the next Facebook, is a little off kilter. What we found was that it was older adults that were interested in starting up businesses. And when you look at the reasons, it's the older adults now face a particular problem, which is one that is difficult to embrace, and that is we live longer. I'm 74 years old. I was born at the start of the First World War. I'm now starting another company. I'm no good at golf. I'm no good at shuffleboard. And so are and this is true of a lot of our generation. We want to age in place, and we want to do something useful. So if I've got one sort of idea that you might want to think about, is how you attract older adults, because they also have a high proportion of the wealth. 80% in America. And they can also be investors with the young, smart kids who have lots of ideas but not money. Which leads me to the next thing. In this entrepreneurial church, just networking is not good enough. What we started doing, which really worked well, was what I call collision networking. You put me in front of somebody my age and we'll start talking about what it was like when we're rationing and post-war and, when Arsenal won the league and so on and so forth, But you put me in front of some 20-year-old techies or even 10-year-old techies like my granddaughter, and I don't know what they're talking about. And they don't know what I'm talking about. And I would just commend to you again the idea that we've never before had a generation of the silent generation, which is mine. I'm breaking my silence right now. The baby boomers, who are changing the demographics of cities around the world. So you're not alone. Don't think you are. The Generation X, Generation Y, the millennials, and the current generation. So we've got multiple generations. And if you harness the talent in all of them, I think it's amazing, what can be achieved. So discovered that there were older folks. And one of the things, I won't dwell too much on this, but because there were so many of them were asking questions which younger people weren't. So we developed programs specifically for older adults. And now there's a whole lot of advice and training programs for boomers. But, you know, just to mention one or two things, the first bit of advice I gave when I talked to people in their 60s and 70s is, number one, you've got to be fit. Don't even think of starting a business unless you're as fit as you can be, because you're going to work 7 days a week and you've got to keep up with young kids. Choose a business you understand, ensure that you have support of your family, and so on. I won't dwell on this, because what I want to do is to go to some of the things we did that worked. And I'll touch on one or two of them. I've got 5 daughters, and I was brought up by 2 ladies, 3 really, because my mother was off in London in the war and I was in the country. So I've been surrounded by women all my life. So one of the things I've learned is that actually they make most of the decisions. The ones we think we make, they've made, and they let us appear to make them. Right? So, there's a point to this. 60% of that 8,000 people that came through the door in the time of ultimate despair in Detroit were women. Now, many of them had great ideas for businesses. You know, a new cafeteria, a taxi service for people to go to do their rehab or to pick up their prescriptions, a yoga clinic or whatever. But they were what I would call small businesses that would be unattractive to venture capitalists who are looking for something to grow from nothing to the sky and, you know, make 20x on their investment. So one of the challenges we faced was finding money, early stage money, for these mom and pop or mom businesses, which created jobs and were an important part of the social fabric. And by the time I left, we got 3 funds that did that. There was a Woman for Woman fund, there was a Detroit minority fund, and there was a Jewish free loan fund. But again, that's important. You've got to think about not just angel investors and venture capitalists, but where you're going to get what I call almost social investment. You know, the investors would like the money back. They would but they recognize that a high percentage of the investments will be in for a long time, and some of them will be lost, and their fund will not maximize its profits. Between 2011 and 2011, we produced a Tech Town impact report, and I've got one here if anybody want to talk about it afterwards. But we raised very significant amounts of money for some of these companies, and you know, that's a key part of the infrastructure you've got to have in place. The other part is the universities. We got the universities who are developing all this rich intellectual property down at Western Ontario University to set up their tech transfer office in Tech Town. You should do the same. If you've got 3 business incubators, you go to that university and say, look, stop, come out of your ivory tower, come and set up an office, even if you only visit it once or twice a week for however many hours, so that entrepreneurs can understand what technology is coming out of the universities that can be a license to local businesses to get them going. You know, there is no point, in my view, in a university that doesn't engage in the community. But sometimes they've got to be encouraged, because sometimes they're a little, it's business. We're not about business, we're about the perfect solution. But they have a lot of technology, and some of it is free. And just while we're on that, the company that I'm involved in moving forward with right now, which has got a device for measuring people's potential risk for heart disease, we've got approval to market in Canada, and we are partnering with the Ivy Institute at Western Ontario. And so I'll be back here next Wednesday again, and we're hoping to find our first employees. Why did we come here? Well, it was because the Ivy Institute is interested in one of the other big mega trends, right? One of the mega trends that every city in the world faces is changing demographics, older population, smaller population of younger people. The older people want to age in place. You know, so, you know, where we're at now is using the support of the Ivy Institute, who are addressing the other big issue of our time, which is healthcare costs. Canada faces horrific problems in resolving its escalating healthcare costs, as I'm sure you know. But you're not alone. Every other country in the Western world faces the same problem to one degree or another. And technology is going to change it. Mobile technology, for example, are going to allow people, instead of going to hospital, to get their treatment and be monitored at home. It's just one example. So that's why we're coming to London, because there's high technology and there's an interest in changing healthcare, which has to be changed. And, you know, it's another thing for you to think about when you think what the value proposition is for London. I just put this up there because it's cute, because this was a woman who had next to nothing but some spare material in her attic, and she started a hat design business. You know, she's in her 60s. And I think when you're looking at how you develop London and create jobs, you have two ways to go. You can either be what I'd call inclusive, which is what we were in Detroit. We had people who wanted to start a taxi rickshaw service down the riverfront. We had people who wanted to do these hats. We had, you know, people who wanted to bake cookies and stuff, as well as people who had a cure for cancer. It was really complicated to figure out training programs that suited all those different types of business. But I thought it, and a lot of other people who know more about the subject than I, also thought it was important. Or you can be exclusive. You can say, what we're going to do, and there are some universities and some cities that do this, we're going to look for the next high-tech business. So we're going to provide a proof of concept center where we're going to submit all these high-techy ideas to rigorous testing, and we're going to come up with something that is going to be the next Google or whatever. Two ways to go, and I guess London needs to think which way they're going. This is just, forgive me, a little plug for a company that's going to be landing in London, which is the Angio Defender. And if any of you have trouble with, anybody have trouble with sleep apnea? Okay, gentlemen there. You need to go and read my blog, sir, because it'll put you to sleep. It's called New Birthdays for Old Men. And what it is, it's about wellness and thinking ahead and not destroying your health, as I tried to do in my 20s and 30s. and you know, not ending up in the ER and using some of these new mobile devices like the pedometer I've got on here to measure how many steps I take during the day and so on. The other thing, and you know, it's very simple to say, but it's sometimes difficult to do. You've got to keep remembering who the organizations are that helped you. We got, despite all you read about Detroit, we got the city, we got the county, we got the state, we got the federal government, we got the foundations, we got individuals, all to contribute real funding as well as support. We had Exim Bank from, you know, in the building, among others. And what I've discovered in, you know, in a relatively long career is if you recognize people who helped you, they give you help back 100-fold. And I made it a practice of, when I was talking to journalists, my target was in the third paragraph of every story. It would be, well, whatever the story was about, there would be a quote, open quotes. We couldn't have done this without the help of X, whoever X was. I'm not making something up, but you know, if the governor had helped us to do something, then we'd say the governor helped us. The governor would then, we'd get a card from her office. If it was a foundation, they would send her a thank you note. So you have to, when you're building this community that is supporting folks who are trying to set up new businesses, keep thanking them. I mean, I'll just tell you a funny story. They called me when they were doing a Pure Michigan campaign, and they said, would you say something about the help you've had from the state? And I said, sure. And they turned the camera on me, and I said, well, we couldn't have done it without the help of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. Guess what? They said, cut, print, and it went round the world. We got millions of dollars worth of advertising for Detroit, for Techtown, for Astrand, our small companies, on somebody else's dime, the state's dime. I threw this in there because there's a family connection. My father built that boat. It's the Mayflower II. He's dead, God bless his soul, now. But this was in 1957. He built that ship and sailed it across to the town of Plymouth, Massachusetts, where he gave it to the American people. The town of Plymouth has used that ship to reinvent itself as a historical destination. You know, our first speaker was talking about, you know, not forgetting your history, or maybe the second speaker, I'm sorry, if I've got it wrong. And, you know, you're London, right? Well, there's one other London. It's one of the biggest cities in the world, right? You know, I was thinking today, if I was given the job of promoting you, it would be based on that. I would seek a partnership with London, and then I'd have an advertising campaign saying, it's better in London, Ontario. We're smaller, we try harder. It may not stand up to examination, but think outside the box. You've got the River Thames. You could create museums, you could create history, you could create a destination, rather like your neighbours in Stratford. I go there every year. I used to go to Stratford in England, but Stratford in here is way better, I can tell you. True. It's true. I took, in summary, it's about confidence. It's about a community which is not just a community of people who like each other or get on with each other, but provide services and support, financial, mentoring, internships, community college retraining. You know, among other things, most of the people in this room are going to have at least 1, 2, maybe 3, 4, 5. Some of the younger ones, you're going to have 10 more careers. You're going to change as technology, which is another mega trend, keeps changing the jobs. So building out all those resources so that they can be employed when you need them is crucially important. Well, thank you very much. And you've been very patient, and I didn't expect as many people in this room at 2:45 in the afternoon. Thank you.